Lena Alvarez stood in front of the class with her paper shaking in her hands, her heart beating so loud she swore everyone could hear it. The moment she opened her mouth, her accent slipped through, soft but noticeable, and a few whispers turned into giggles. Tara Brooks smirked from the back row, already waiting to pounce. Lena tried to keep reading, but every syllable felt heavier than the last. Why did her voice sound wrong here? Why couldn't she just fit in? As the laughter grew, her throat tightened until she couldn't force out another word. Her eyes burned, but she refused to let tears fall in front of them. What if the world never lets her speak without cruelty? What if her voice was meant to stay hidden forever? And what if the girl they mock today becomes the voice they'll one day recognize everywhere? Lena rushed out of the classroom the moment the bell rang, walking fast enough that her vision blurred. The hallway felt too bright, too open, too full of people who might have heard what happened. She kept her head down, hoping no one would notice her red eyes or her trembling breath. Each step sounded like an echo of the laughter she was trying to forget. She wondered why her words always came out wrong, why the accent she grew up with turned into a target the moment she spoke. Her chest felt tight, like something inside her was begging to break free but didn't know how. As she neared the exit, she almost collided with Mrs. Rowan, who gently called her name. But Lena couldn't look up. Not yet. She didn't want kindness to make the tears spill. She just wanted to disappear before her shame swallowed her whole. Lena made it outside, sinking onto a bench near the edge of the courtyard, where no one usually went. The cold air felt sharp but calming against her burning cheeks. She pulled her knees close and tried to silence the storm inside her. Every insult replayed in her mind, louder than the chatter of other students in the distance. She didn't hate her accent. She hated how the world reacted to it. She wondered if speaking was worth the pain it brought. The longer she sat there, the heavier her heart felt, and for a moment she feared she might never open her mouth in front of anyone again. But beneath all the hurt, a tiny part of her whispered that she deserved better, that maybe her voice wasn't the problem. Maybe the world just wasn't ready to listen. Still, she wasn't sure she believed it yet. Minutes passed before Lena finally lifted her head, trying to steady her breathing. She didn't hear footsteps approaching until Jaden sat down at the opposite end of the bench, leaving a respectful space between them. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't need to. His silence felt gentle, like a shelter instead of pressure. Lena tried to speak, but her voice cracked, so she shook her head instead. Jaden simply nodded, opening his sketchbook and quietly drawing, giving her the comfort of having someone near without asking her to explain her pain. The warmth of his presence eased something inside her. For the first time since the incident, Lena didn't feel completely alone. She wondered why kindness felt so foreign yet so deeply needed, and whether letting someone stay beside her meant she wasn't as broken as she felt. The bell for the next class echoed across the courtyard, but Lena didn't move. She wasn't ready to walk back into the building where everyone had seen her fall apart. Jaden closed his sketchbook softly and finally spoke, telling her she didn't have to let anyone decide the value of her voice. His words landed gently but powerfully, like someone handing her a piece of herself she had forgotten existed. Lena felt her chest loosen a little, though doubt still weighed her down. She wondered how someone like Jaden could see strength in her when she couldn't find any herself. Mose, ding! As she stood, her legs shaky but determined, she took one small breath that felt different, almost like a first step towards something she couldn't name yet. Maybe broken things could still rise. Maybe her voice wasn't meant to be hidden forever. After school, the building emptied until only a faint echo lingered in the hallways. Lena slipped back into Mrs. Rowan's classroom, hoping to collect the notebook she left behind without being seen. But as she stepped inside, she froze. Mrs. Rowan was there, sitting quietly at her desk. She didn't mention the morning, didn't ask how Lena felt, didn't even look surprised. Instead, she asked Lena if she could read the passage again, just for her. Lena hesitated, her voice still raw, but something in Mrs. Rowan's gentle eyes made her try. When she spoke, her accent wrapped around each word like soft music. Wounded, scared, but beautiful. Mrs. Rowan's expression shifted from sympathy to awe. For the first time, Lena saw someone react to her voice not with laughter but with genuine admiration. It felt strange, fragile, and achingly new. When Lena finished reading, she lowered her eyes, expecting pity or correction. Instead, Mrs. Rowan told her she had something rare, something people trained their whole lives to achieve. Lena blinked in disbelief, unsure whether to accept the praise or hide from it. Mrs. Rowan explained that emotion lived in Lena's voice, not despite her accent, but because of it. That thought felt impossible, yet deeply comforting. She encouraged Lena to consider performing at the school showcase, a suggestion that sent panic rushing through her chest. Lena insisted she couldn't, not after what happened, but Mrs. Rowan gently reminded her that growth never comes from hiding. Those words stayed with Lena long after she left the room, echoing louder than the laughter she had endured. Maybe her voice wasn't weak. Maybe she just never used it for herself before. Lena didn't go home right away. Instead, she wandered to the far side of the courtyard where Jaden usually sketched after school. He looked up as soon as he heard her footsteps, studying her face with quiet concern. She sat beside him without speaking, and after a long silence, she finally told him what Mrs. Rowan said. Jaden didn't react with shock or pity, only a soft smile, like he had known it all along. He told her that her voice had weight, that people listened differently when she spoke because something real lived in her words. Lena felt warmth spread through her chest, battling the doubt that had lived there for years. His belief in her felt like a hand steadying her from the inside. She wondered if maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as invisible as she thought. That night, Lena sat on her bedroom floor with a stack of old books and videos of spoken-word performances playing softly on her phone. Each voice carried strength she wished she had. Voices smooth, rough, trembling, confident. She mimicked their rhythm, their pauses, their boldness, but every time she heard her own voice, she flinched. The accent she grew up with still felt like a flaw she couldn't escape. But when she remembered how Mrs. Rowan looked at her, and how Jaden listened without judgment, something shifted. She tried again, softer this time, letting her accent flow instead of fighting it. The words came out shaky, but honest. For the first time, she wondered if beauty didn't come from perfection but from truth. She kept practicing until her voice felt less like a burden and more like a quiet flame growing inside her. Just as Lena felt herself growing stronger, her world collapsed again. The next morning, whispers followed her through the halls, whispers carrying her name. Someone had recorded her practicing behind the school last week, her voice shaky and uncertain, and uploaded it for everyone to see. Tara's mocking laugh echoed from every corner, louder than ever. Lena felt the ground drop beneath her feet as she watched the video on someone's phone, her face flushing with humiliation. She thought she had escaped. All the strength she built overnight crumbled in seconds. She dropped her books and fled the hallway, unable to breathe. The world didn't want her voice. It wanted to tear it apart, and for a moment, Lena believed it might succeed. Lena didn't expect to return to school after the video, but she forced herself to walk through the hallways with her head lowered, wishing she were invisible. When she entered Mrs. Rowan's empty classroom, she felt her knees almost give out. She expected disappointment or pity, but Mrs. Rowan simply placed a folder on the desk and said she had something important to show her. Inside was a flyer for a national spoken-word competition, one known for powerful stories, raw emotion, and voices that shook entire rooms. Mrs. Rowan said she believed Lena belonged on that stage. Lena's chest tightened with fear. She couldn't imagine standing in front of strangers when she couldn't even survive her own classmates. But Mrs. Rowan's voice held a certainty Lena didn't understand. She told her the world needed stories like hers. Lena felt something awaken, a fragile spark refusing to die. Lena spent the rest of lunch sitting on the floor beside the lockers, reading and rereading the flyer. Her heart beat fast every time she imagined herself performing. It felt impossible. Yet the thought wouldn't leave her alone. Jaden found her there, knees pulled up, eyes full of uncertainty. When she told him about the competition, he didn't laugh or hesitate. He told her she had to try. His voice was steady, sincere, like he was stating a fact instead of an opinion. He reminded her that Tara's cruelty didn't define her, and neither did the video. Lena wanted to believe him, but doubt lingered like a shadow she couldn't outrun. Still, having someone believe in her so completely made the impossible feel a little less unreachable. Maybe she could grow into the girl they didn't expect. That evening, Lena sat at her desk with a blank notebook in front of her. She wanted to write something worthy of the competition, but every attempt collapsed under self-doubt. She scribbled lines, crossed them out, tore out pages, and started again. Nothing felt good enough. She wanted to tell her truth, but the words were tangled behind fear and years of shame. After a long struggle, she closed her eyes and let herself feel instead of think. She wrote about being mocked, about wanting to sound normal, about the moment her voice cracked in class, about the pain of being laughed at for simply existing. And when she heard her own words whispered softly in her natural accent, something inside her loosened. The poem wasn't perfect, but it was honest. It felt like the beginning of her real voice. The next day, Lena returned to Mrs. Rowan with her draft. Her hands shook as she passed over the notebook, terrified of being told her writing was weak. But Mrs. Rowan read each line slowly, her eyes softening with every word. When she finished, she looked at Lena with a quiet pride that made Lena's throat ache. She said the poem was raw and powerful, that it carried truth people would feel in their bones. Lena couldn't hold back a small gasp of relief. She had expected criticism, not praise. Mrs. Rowan told her they would work together, shaping the poem and strengthening her delivery, if Lena was willing to try. For the first time, Lena felt not just seen but understood. Her voice finally had a place where it wasn't wrong. It was finally allowed to exist. Word spread quickly. Tara overheard someone mention Lena's poem and the competition flyer. Later that afternoon, she cornered Lena near the gym, smirking like she had discovered a new weakness to exploit. She mocked the idea of Lena performing anywhere, let alone on a stage. Lena felt old fear rise, squeezing her chest, but this time something was different. Tara's voice no longer echoed inside her the same way. Lena held her poem tightly, reminding herself of the people who believed in her. She didn't fight back, but she didn't crumble either. Tara's insults felt smaller, like they no longer had the power to break her completely. When Lena walked away, her legs were shaking, but her heart felt stronger. A choice was forming inside her, one she couldn't ignore. Maybe she could be more than the girl they mocked. Lena thought she could avoid Tara for the rest of the week, but life was not that kind. During lunch, Tara spotted her sitting alone beneath the stairwell and marched straight toward her, with her friends trailing behind, like shadows hungry for drama. Lena felt her stomach twist as Tara began repeating lines from her poem in an exaggerated version of her accent, making the words sound twisted and ugly. The laughter stung worse than the cold morning air creeping through the building's cracks. Lena tried to stand, tried to walk away, but her legs felt heavy and unsteady. She didn't want to cry, not here, not again, but the pressure of humiliation swelled until she could barely breathe. For the first time since she started practicing, Lena wondered if she had made a mistake believing she could rise above cruelty. Maybe she wasn't built for this kind of battle. By the time Lena escaped the stairwell, her vision was clouded by tears she couldn't stop. She rushed into the nearest bathroom and locked herself inside a stall, burying her face in her hands. The pain felt sharper than before, Not because of Tara's words, but because Lena had allowed herself to hope, only to feel that hope crushed again. Her chest tightened until she could barely inhale, each breath trembling as she tried to silence her sobs. She wondered why she kept trying when it always ended the same way. A tiny voice inside her whispered that she was foolish to believe she belonged on any stage, much less a national competition. She stayed there for what felt like hours, letting the weight of shame bury her, wishing she could peel off the part of her that made her a target. Her voice, her truth, herself. When school ended, Lena walked home slowly, feeling hollow, as if her voice had been scraped out of her chest. She entered her room and closed the door softly, sinking to the floor beside her bed. She opened her notebook to the poem she had written, but the words looked different now. Weak, childish, embarrassing. She tore out page after page, crumpling them with shaking hands until the floor was littered with her efforts. She whispered the lines out loud, but her voice cracked, sounding small and broken. She hated that Tara's voice was louder in her head than her own. For a long moment, Lena considered abandoning the competition altogether. She felt like she was slipping backward into the version of herself she had tried so hard to escape. The girl who hid, who apologized for taking up space, who believed silence was safer. Lena didn't hear the knock on her door until it opened slowly, and Jaden stepped inside, holding his sketchbook against his chest. He didn't ask what happened. Her tear-streaked face said enough. He sat down on the floor, next to her without a word, then opened his sketchbook to a page he had been working on. It was a drawing of Lena standing on a stage, her expression strong, her voice echoing from her chest like light breaking through darkness. She stared at the drawing in disbelief. Jaden told her he drew her the way he saw her, even on days when she couldn't see it herself. His words cracked something open inside her, not with pain, but with quiet hope. For the first time since the stairwell, Lena felt her lungs expand. Maybe she could still fight. Maybe her voice wasn't lost, just bruised. Later that night, Lena sat alone with Jaden's drawing propped against her pillow. She traced the lines with her fingertip, imagining what it would feel like to stand on a stage and speak without fear. She read her poem again, this time letting the words settle gently instead of judging them. They weren't perfect, but they were hers. And maybe her accent didn't ruin them. It gave them life. With a slow breath, she rewrote the lines she had torn apart earlier, letting her true voice shape them. She didn't know if she was ready for the competition, but she knew one thing. She wasn't ready to give up, not after coming this far. Something inside her had shifted, rising quietly like light from a cracked door. She decided she would keep fighting, even if her voice shook. The next morning, Lena woke before sunrise, her mind quieter than it had been in days. Jaden's drawing still rested beside her bed, a reminder that someone saw strength in her, even when she couldn't see it. She got dressed slowly, choosing a simple sweater that made her feel grounded. When she arrived at school, she walked with her poem, tucked safely inside her backpack like a fragile secret she was finally willing to protect. Instead of hiding, she went straight to Mrs. Rowan's classroom, her steps steady despite the lingering sting of yesterday's humiliation. She told Mrs. Rowan she was ready to keep practicing. Her voice trembled, but not from fear, from resolve. Mrs. Rowan's smile was soft and proud, the kind that made Lena feel like she was stepping into a version of herself she didn't know she had the right to become. Over the next few days, Lena met with Mrs. Rowan after school, practicing each stanza of her poem. At first, her voice cracked, still too tangled in fear, but Mrs. Rowan coached her gently through every stumble. She taught her how to breathe, how to let silence hold weight, how to let the rhythm of her accent guide her instead of fighting it. Each practice session chipped away at the wall Lena had built around herself. She began to feel the meaning of her own words, not just repeat them. Sometimes she faltered, memories of Tara's cruelty creeping in. But each time she pushed a little harder. She wasn't just practicing a poem. She was rebuilding the part of herself that believed she deserved to be heard. And with every attempt, her voice grew steadier, warmer, more alive. Lena spent every night rewriting her poem, sharpening the lines that felt uncertain, softening the parts that didn't feel true. She let herself embrace the accent she had once tried so hard to erase, realizing it carried pieces of her mother's voice, her childhood, her journey. It wasn't something to hide. It was proof she belonged somewhere. One evening, as she practiced in the courtyard, she caught Jaden watching from a distance. When she finished, he walked over and told her she sounded like someone who finally understood her own work. His words made her chest warm in a way she couldn't explain. For once, she believed him. Even when Tara passed by, rolling her eyes, the old sting didn't land the way it used to. Lena's roots were finally starting to hold. The night before the registration deadline, Lena sat at her desk with the competition's online form open. Her finger hovered over the submit button, her heart racing. Doubt whispered that she wasn't ready, that the audience would laugh just like Tara had. But memories of Mrs. Rowan's pride and Jaden's belief crowded out the fear. She thought about her younger self, the girl who always stayed quiet so she wouldn't be mocked. She imagined telling that girl she was about to enter a national competition. A small, shaky smile pulled at her lips. She clicked submit before she could overthink it. A wave of fear washed over her, but beneath it, something steadier took root. She had finally chosen herself. Whatever happened next, she wasn't hiding anymore. The next morning, Lena walked through the halls, feeling lighter than she had in years. When Tara sneered at her near the lockers, expecting the usual flinch, Lena simply looked past her and kept walking. That small act of defiance burned brighter than any shout. Tara blinked, confused, as if she didn't recognize the girl she once controlled. Lena wasn't invincible. Not yet. But she was no longer helpless. She felt her poem inside her like a heartbeat, steady and alive. For the first time, the school didn't feel like a battlefield. It felt like a place she could stand without shrinking. She didn't know what the competition would bring, but she knew one thing with absolute clarity. She was rising, slowly but surely, and nothing Tara said could drag her back down. The auditorium buzzed with nervous energy as contestants rehearsed, paced or whispered last-minute edits to themselves. Lena stood backstage, gripping the microphone with trembling fingers. Her heart thumped so loudly she could barely hear the announcer calling the next performer. She felt the familiar swirl of fear tightening her chest. Fear of stumbling. Fear of freezing. Fear of being laughed at again. But then she remembered Jaden's drawing, Mrs. Rowan's steady encouragement, and her own voice growing stronger through every painful step she'd survived. She looked down at her poem, edges softened by the number of times she'd held it, and breathed in deeply. She wasn't here to prove anything to Tara or the world. She was here because she finally believed she had something worth saying. And when her name was called, she stepped toward the stage, her fear walking beside her, but her courage walking ahead. The stage felt enormous as Lena stepped into the light, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. She could barely make out the audience, just shadows and the faint glimmer of hundreds of eyes waiting for her to speak. A part of her wanted to run, to hide behind the curtains, and let someone braver take her place. But then she thought about her younger self, the girl who cried in bathroom stalls and whispered her dreams into pillows. She owed that girl something. She lifted the microphone, her hands trembling, and took a breath. The silence stretched so long she almost broke under it, until she finally let the first words slip from her lips. Her accent trembled at first, soft and unsteady, but she didn't fight it. She let it guide her. And as she spoke, something inside her began to settle, like her voice was finally coming home. As Lena continued, her voice grew stronger, shaped by every moment she had survived. The poem wasn't polished or perfect. It was raw, honest, and carved straight from her experience. She spoke of the girl who whispered in fear, the girl who was mocked for sounding different, The girl who learned to rise from her own broken pieces. Her accent didn't disappear. It shined, turning each line into something uniquely hers. The audience leaned in, the room growing so quiet she could hear her breath between each stanza. For the first time in her life, people weren't laughing, they were listening. Truly listening. The weight that had lived in her chest for years loosened with each word she released. By the time she reached the final lines, her voice felt like a flame, burning, steady, impossible to ignore. And for the first time, she felt proud of it. By the time Lena reached the final stanza, her voice no longer shook. It carried years of hurt, years of silence, and years of waiting to be seen. The last line fell from her lips like a release she'd been holding forever, landing in the room with a weight that silenced even the softest breaths. She lowered the microphone slowly, her heart beating hard but proud. For a long moment, the auditorium stayed perfectly still, as if the world itself paused to absorb what she had just given. Then, like a wave, applause surged forward. Soft at first, then louder, rising into something overwhelming. Lena felt tears blur her vision, not from pain but from shock. She had spoken, and the world listened. Her voice, the same voice she once tried to bury, was now lifting her higher than she ever dreamed. After the applause faded and the lights dimmed, Lena stepped backstage with shaking legs, overwhelmed by what had just happened. Jaden reached her first, wrapping her in a gentle hug that steadied her trembling breath. Mrs. Rowan followed, holding her shoulders with both hands and telling her she had done something extraordinary. Lena could barely respond. She was still trying to understand how the girl who once hid in bathrooms had just stood on a national stage and made an entire room fall silent. As they led her toward the results board, she felt strangely calm. Whatever happened, win or lose, she had reclaimed something far more important than a trophy. When the screen lit up and her name appeared at the top, Lena froze. She had won. Not because she was flawless, but because she dared to speak. When Lena walked into school the next morning, the world felt different. Lighter, brighter, almost unreal. She expected whispers or stares, maybe even laughter. But instead, the hallway quieted as she walked through it. Students who had once mocked her now stepped aside, their eyes wide with surprise. Some looked guilty, some curious, some simply stunned. Lena held her books close, unsure how to react, feeling the weight of her win settle into her chest like something warm and steady. She had spoken on a stage bigger than anything she had ever dared imagine, and people heard her, really heard her. She wasn't the same girl who once hid under stairwells or cried in bathroom stalls. Her voice had carved a new place for her, and for the first time, she didn't shrink to fit the world. She let the world widen to make space for her. Later that day, Lena was called to the principal's office, not out of trouble, but celebration. The school wanted her to perform at the next assembly, to represent them as the newly crowned national spoken word champion. The words felt surreal. She sat in the chair across from the principal, nodding politely, but inside she felt a swirl of excitement and nerves. Part of her still remembered how it felt to be laughed at, how it felt when her voice shook and broke in front of her peers. But she also remembered the stage lights, the applause, the moment she realized her voice wasn't something to hide. She accepted the invitation with a calm confidence she never thought she'd have. The girl who once feared speeches was now being asked to speak for everyone. Life had shifted, and she was finally ready to step into it. During lunch, Lena sat with Jaden under their usual tree, but everything felt different now. Students passed by, offering shy smiles or soft congratulations. Some apologized for things they'd said in the past. Lena didn't hold anger. She felt strangely free of it. She wasn't seeking approval anymore. She simply existed in her truth. Jaden watched her closely, a soft smile tugging at his lips as if he were seeing her in a new light. He told her she looked like someone who finally understood her worth. Lena laughed softly, The sound warm and unburdened. She felt herself unfolding, becoming someone braver than she ever thought possible. She still had fears, still had doubts, but they no longer controlled her. For the first time, she felt like she belonged, not because she changed herself, but because she embraced who she always was. As the final bell rang, Lena gathered her things and walked toward the exit, only to find Tara waiting by the doors. But this time, her expression wasn't sharp or smug. It was hesitant, almost uncertain. Tara asked if they could talk. Lena felt a small ache in her chest, a reminder of years of mockery, but she nodded. Tara didn't apologize right away. She fumbled, searching for words, admitting she didn't expect Lena to actually succeed. She said she never realized how much her cruelty had hurt. Lena listened quietly, not angry anymore, just tired. She told Tara that her voice was not something Tara had the power to break. Tara looked stunned, not used to hearing Lena speak with strength. They didn't become friends, but something shifted. A door quietly closing on a chapter Lena no longer needed to carry. That evening, Lena sat on her bedroom floor, watching her performance on a clipped video that had spread across social media. Comments poured in, people moved by her accent, her story, her courage. Some wrote about their own struggles with identity, their own battles with shame. Lena felt tears rise, not from pain, but pride. She realized her voice now carried beyond her school, beyond the stage. It reached people who felt unseen, unheard, forgotten. She wasn't just speaking for herself anymore. She was speaking for anyone who had ever been told their voice didn't belong. As she closed her laptop, she whispered a quiet promise to herself. She would never hide again. The girl they mocked for her accent had become the woman the world listened to. And this time, she wasn't afraid of being heard.